Mafia boss opened the hospital room door in anger. Until he saw his ex-wife holding newborn twins. The meeting room smelled of expensive cigars and fear. My men sat around the long marble table, waiting for my next command, eyes lowered, voices silent. Power used to feel like oxygen to me, something I couldn't live without, but that day it felt heavy, suffocating. The numbers, the deals, the promises of control meant nothing when my phone buzzed on the table. I remember the vibration slicing through the silence like a blade. I almost ignored it. No one dared to call me during business, but something in me twitched when I saw the name on the screen, Dr. Elena Moretti. My hand froze midair. That name didn't belong in my world anymore. I hadn't heard it since the day Isabella walked out of my life 5 years ago. Still, I answered, my voice low, cold, steady. What is it? For a moment, there was only the sound of her breath, shaking, nervous, then those words that shattered everything. Luca? It's Isabella. She's in the hospital. My heart stopped. It wasn't supposed to react like that. I'd built walls, layers of steel around it, taught it to beat only for business, for vengeance, for survival. But her name ripped through me like a gunshot. I felt my chair scrape back, my men staring, confused. Cancel everything, I muttered, already moving. Boss, one of them asked, but I didn't look back. I grabbed my coat and keys and walked out of that empire like a ghost leaving its own body. The elevator ride down felt endless, every second echoing her name in my head. Isabella. The woman who once knew every inch of my soul and then tore herself away from it. The woman who made me human and then made me hate being one. 5 years, and I'd told myself she was gone. 5 years, and still, one phone call and I was bleeding inside like it happened yesterday. The rain was falling when I reached the street. New York's skyline blurred through the storm, but I didn't care. My driver tried to open the car door, but I waved him off. I'll drive. He hesitated, no one questioned me, but tonight he wanted to. I didn't give him the chance. I slid behind the wheel, slammed the door, and the engine roared to life. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as the city lights streaked by. My mind was chaos, memories flashing like lightning. Her laugh, soft and warm. Her tears the night she left, whispering that she couldn't watch me destroy myself for power. I'd told her I didn't need love. I lied. Every streetlight I passed felt like a heartbeat, dragging me closer to something I wasn't ready for. My phone buzzed again, Elena's voice through the speaker this time, trembling. She just gave birth, Luca. I slammed the brakes at a red light, breath caught in my throat. Birth? My voice cracked. She was pregnant? Elena hesitated. You need to come. Now. The light turned green but I couldn't move for a second. Pregnant. My chest burned, my pulse thundered in my ears. I pressed the gas, harder this time, as the world blurred into a tunnel of rain and guilt. How many nights had I told myself I didn't care? How many times had I buried her memory under money, women, blood, power? And yet here I was, chasing the ghost of a love I killed myself. The hospital came into view, glowing white against the night sky like a beacon of judgment. I pulled into the emergency bay, ignoring the guards, the signs, the rain that soaked through my suit as I stepped out. The automatic doors hissed open, and the smell of antiseptic hit me like cold steel. Nurses turned to look, their whispers following me. Everyone in this city knew my face. Some feared it. Some worshipped it. Tonight, I didn't care. Isabella Romano, I said to the receptionist, voice sharp as a blade. She froze, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Room 312, she whispered. I nodded once, already walking, boots echoing down the corridor. My reflection in the polished floor looked like a stranger, cold eyes, wet hair, a storm in a tailored suit. For the first time in years, I wasn't the mafia boss. I was just a man chasing a woman he'd broken. Each step felt heavier. The memories clawed back, her laughter in our old kitchen, her voice telling me I'd become someone she didn't recognize, the door slamming the night she left. I used to think losing her was the price of power. Now it felt like power was the curse that cost me her. When I reached the elevator, my hand hovered over the button. My pulse was out of control. I didn't know what I'd find behind that hospital door: anger, hatred, maybe nothing. But I knew one thing: whatever was waiting, it was something my empire couldn't protect me from. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection again and almost didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked scared. I hadn't felt that in years. The doors opened to the third floor, and I stepped out into the quiet hallway, the hum of machines and whispers of nurses filling the air. My shoes clicked against the tiles as I walked toward room 312, my heart pounding with every step. Isabella, her name was a prayer, a curse, a memory, and a promise all at once. The closer I got, the more the past and present blurred until it felt like time itself was folding in on me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know if I was walking toward redemption or ruin. I stopped outside room 312, staring at the white door like it was the entrance to a world I wasn't meant to touch anymore. My hand hovered inches from the handle, trembling, not from fear of bullets or betrayal, but from the weight of 5 lost years pressing down on me. The corridor was empty except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the slow beep of machines behind thin walls. Hospitals had always unsettled me. They smelled of truth, and truth was something I had spent years burying under layers of power. I could hear footsteps somewhere behind me, nurses murmuring, the distant cry of a newborn slicing through the silence. And it hit me how fragile everything sounded in here compared to the noise of my life outside, the growl of engines, the echo of gunfire, the click of deals sealed with blood. I'd traded every human sound for the rhythm of violence, and yet tonight, one fragile heartbeat on the other side of this door could undo everything I'd built. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't answer. I didn't need more words from Elena. The fact that she'd called meant things were real, not rumors, not another cruel twist of memory. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal frame of the door, my breath fogging the glass pane. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to pray, but I didn't remember how. My father used to say men like us weren't born under God's light, we were forged in the dark, and the dark never forgets its own. Still, I whispered her name beneath my breath, a cracked, broken sound that barely felt like mine. Isabella. Every syllable was a scar reopening. I thought about the night she left, the rain hammering against the windows, her suitcase trembling in her hand, her eyes full of tears that looked like diamonds and daggers all at once. "You're not the man I married," she'd said. "You can't love and destroy at the same time, Luca." And I'd told her love was for people who could afford weakness. What a fool I was. I didn't realize until she was gone that weakness was what made us human. I straightened, adjusting my coat, trying to gather the fragments of the Mafia boss around me like armor, but it didn't fit anymore. The moment I'd heard her name, that armor cracked. I could feel every breath, every heartbeat, every regret like open wounds beneath my suit. A nurse turned the corner, startled when she saw me standing there, soaked from the rain, eyes hollow. "Sir, are you?" I lifted a hand, cutting her off gently. "Give me a minute." She nodded, hesitated, and then left me alone again. I stared at the small window on the door, but the curtain was drawn. I could see only the dim outline of movement, shadows crossing light. My mind betrayed me, painting images I wasn't ready to face: Isabella pale and fragile, tubes in her arm, her eyes closed, maybe worse. The thought clawed at my chest. I'd watched men die without blinking, but the idea of losing her again, this time forever, made my throat tighten until I couldn't breathe. I took a step back, running my hand through my hair, pacing. What would I even say if she was awake? "Hey, it's me, the monster you married? The one who burned bridges until there was no way back? The one who thought he could buy peace with blood?" Every word sounded wrong before I could even speak it. I leaned against the wall, eyes closed, and let the memories play. Her laughter in our apartment kitchen, her hands sliding around my waist while I pretended to cook. The way she used to patch up my knuckles after fights, whispering that someday those hands would hold something softer. I never believed her. I never thought softness could survive in my world. Maybe that's why she left, to save whatever light was left inside her before I smothered it completely. A doctor walked past, glancing at me, recognition flashing in his eyes. I saw the fear there, the same fear everyone had when they realized who I was. But tonight, that fear disgusted me. I didn't want to be feared. I wanted to be forgiven. I pushed off the wall and turned back to the door. My reflection in the glass looked nothing like the man in the newspapers, the ruthless Don of New York, the untouchable Romano heir. I looked tired, older than my 34 years, the kind of man who'd traded love for survival and realized too late it wasn't worth the cost. The door felt heavier than steel when I placed my palm against it. I thought about the last 5 birthdays I'd spent surrounded by people who toasted my success but didn't know me at all. Not one of them knew how quiet it got after midnight, how I'd stare at the city skyline wondering if she was somewhere out there thinking of me. Now, standing here, I realized that all the time I'd spent trying to forget her had only built a deeper cage around my heart. The irony of it all made me laugh under my breath, a rough, humorless sound that echoed through the hall. I'd conquered cities, buried enemies, built an empire out of fear, and yet one woman, one door, one phone call could bring me to my knees. I looked at the handle again. Just a simple twist and everything would change. My pulse quickened, my fingers twitched. Behind that door was the truth I'd run from, the woman who once called me her world, and now maybe wanted nothing to do with me. But if she was alive, if she was breathing, that was enough for now. I could take the hate, the anger, the tears. What I couldn't take was the silence of knowing I was too late. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my hands. The hallway seemed to fade away until there was only me, the door, and the pounding of my heart. Somewhere down the corridor, another newborn cried, the sound rising and falling like a siren. I wondered if she could hear it too, if she was awake, if she was holding someone else's child, someone else's future. The thought stabbed deeper than any knife. For a moment, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Please, just let her be okay." I didn't know who I was talking to, God, fate, or maybe the ghost of the man I used to be. My phone buzzed once more, a message from Elena, room 312. "She's waiting." My breath caught. Waiting. That word broke something open inside me. Maybe she wasn't gone. Maybe there was still something left to say, something left to fight for. My fingers tightened on the handle, but I didn't turn it yet. Instead, I took one last deep breath, feeling the burn of the hospital's sterile air in my lungs, and whispered to the door like it could hear me, "You still own me, Isabella. Even after everything." The words hung in the silence, heavy and true. I squared my shoulders, wiped the rain from my face, and prepared myself for whatever waited beyond that door. Knowing that whatever I found would either save me, or destroy what little was left, when my fingers finally turned the handle, the world seemed to slow. The door gave a soft click, and the sterile smell of the room mixed with the faint scent of roses, hers. For a second, I couldn't move. The hum of machines, the soft whimper of infants, the quiet shuffle of nurses, it all blurred into one trembling sound. Then I stepped inside. The light was dim, filtered through pale curtains that glowed with the city's reflection. Isabella lay on the bed, her skin pale but glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her hair was tangled across her shoulders, her lips parted in exhaustion. And in her arms? 2 tiny bundles wrapped in white blankets. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. I couldn't breathe. The woman I'd spent years trying to forget was here, holding life itself. My world, the blood, the business, the chaos, felt miles away, like it belonged to another man. I didn't speak at first. I just stood there, drenched in rain and regret. Isabella's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw me, she froze. No words, no tears, just silence heavy enough to crush us both. "Luca," she whispered, barely audible. My name on her lips hit harder than any bullet. I stepped closer, unsure if I had the right. Her grip tightened around the babies, as if shielding them from a storm she knew too well. I stopped. "Elena called me," I said quietly. "She told me you were here." My voice cracked, betraying more than I wanted. Isabella's gaze softened for a second before hardening again. "You shouldn't be," she said. "This isn't your world anymore." I swallowed, my throat burning. Maybe it never should have been. One of the babies stirred, a tiny whimper filling the air. I'd heard the cries of men dying, but nothing like that sound. It pierced straight through the armor I'd spent years building. "They're mine?" I asked, though I already knew. The moment I saw them, something deep inside me recognized them. She didn't answer, just looked down at the twins, her eyes shining. That silence told me everything. My knees nearly gave out. 5 years ago, when she left, I thought she took everything. I was wrong. She took the best part of me. And now here it was, breathing, moving, fragile and real. I took a step closer, slow, like approaching something sacred. "Can I?" I gestured toward the babies. Isabella hesitated, then nodded slightly. My hands shook as I reached out, afraid to even touch the small bundle. When my fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, the baby's tiny hand wrapped around one of mine, so small it barely covered my fingertip. I felt something inside me break wide open. Years of rage, guilt, violence, all of it washed away by the weight of that touch. "He looks like you," Isabella whispered. Her voice trembled. "And she?" "She has your eyes." I looked at them, two small faces breathing softly in her arms, and I realized this was the first pure thing I'd seen in years. No lies, no deals, no blood. Just life. A nurse entered quietly, checking on Isabella's vitals, pretending not to notice me. Her eyes darted nervously, and I realized the whole hospital probably knew who I was. The Mafia boss standing beside a woman he'd once destroyed, it must have looked like something out of a headline. When the nurse left, the room felt smaller, filled with 1,000 unspoken things between us. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. The words slipped out like a confession. Isabella's eyes filled with pain. "You were lost, Luca," she said softly. "You chose the darkness over everything. I wasn't going to raise children in that world." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but she wasn't. Every word was a truth I'd tried to bury. "I would have changed," I whispered. She gave a faint, sad smile. "You would have tried. But your world doesn't let men change. It eats them alive." She looked at the twins again. "I couldn't let it eat them too." The truth stung. I had no defense. I walked to the window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. My reflection looked like a stranger, eyes hollow, suit drenched, heart shattered. "I thought I'd built an empire," I said quietly. "But I just built walls to keep you out." I turned back to her. "I missed you every damn day, Isabella." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. Maybe she couldn't. The twins stirred again, one letting out a soft cry. Without thinking, I reached for him, and Isabella let me. The baby fit perfectly in my arms, impossibly small. I looked down, and for the first time in years, my hands didn't feel made for violence. They felt like they finally found a reason to exist. Isabella watched me, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "They deserve better than us," she whispered. I looked up at her, shaking my head. "No. They deserve us, just not the versions we used to be." She blinked, as if my words surprised her. Maybe they surprised me too. I rocked the baby gently, feeling the rhythm of his breathing against my chest. It was the sound of everything I'd ever wanted but never knew how to ask for. The machines beeped softly. The city lights shimmered through the window. For the first time in forever, I felt still. I looked at Isabella, her hair sticking to her damp cheeks, her eyes exhausted but full of something fragile, hope, maybe. "You look beautiful," I murmured. She laughed quietly through her tears, shaking her head. "You look like a man who's seen a ghost." I smiled faintly. "I have." "She's sitting right in front of me." She wiped her eyes, whispering, "Don't make promises you can't keep, Luca." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I'm not promising anything. I'm just asking for a chance to do one thing right." She stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at the twins. "They'll need you to be more than a boss," she said. "They'll need a father." I nodded, my throat tight. "Then that's who I'll be." For a moment, the past and the present collided, the Mafia boss and the man he used to be, standing in the same skin. And as I held my son while Isabella cradled our daughter, I realized something I'd never understood before: love isn't what makes you weak. It's what gives you the strength to walk away from everything that does. When the door finally shut behind me, the world seemed to stop breathing. The steady hum of machines, the faint antiseptic smell. The sterile light bouncing off white walls, all of it blurred as my gaze locked on her. Isabella. The name I had tried to bury under business, blood, and bourbon now stood before me like a ghost I could touch. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that broke through the armor I'd spent years forging. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair clung to her forehead with the dampness of exhaustion. In her arms, God help me, were two tiny bundles wrapped in hospital cloths, pink faces barely visible beneath the folds. My lungs forgot how to work. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. For a second, the Mafia boss, the man who ordered fear with a single glance, ceased to exist. All that remained was the man who once loved her enough to burn down his world. Luca. Her voice cracked, soft and trembling, slicing through me like a blade. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, to roar about the years she disappeared, but my tongue refused to move. All I could do was stare, at her, at the infants, at the life that existed beyond my reach. Why didn't you tell me? The words tore out of me before I could stop them, harsh and low, trembling beneath the weight of too many sleepless nights. She flinched, clutching the babies closer as if shielding them from a storm. Because I didn't want them to grow up in your world, she whispered. Her world, the one she had chosen after leaving me, was quiet, normal, painfully ordinary. Mine was chaos and gunfire, loyalty bought with blood. I took a slow step forward, my shoes heavy against the sterile floor. My world? I muttered, voice dark. You mean the one that built the house you lived in? The one that kept you safe when your family turned their back on you? My anger wasn't just at her, it was at the universe for daring to give her peace while I rotted inside my own success. She met my eyes, and there was no fear there, only sorrow. Luca, that world destroyed you. I couldn't let it destroy them too. Them? The twins stirred in her arms, small fists twitching, tiny breaths filling the silence. The sight hit me harder than any bullet ever had. My chest ached in places I thought were dead. I remembered the night she left, her voice shaking, tears streaming, saying she couldn't watch me become a monster. I told her monsters keep the world safe. I was wrong. My knees weakened, and before I knew it, I was standing beside her bed, staring down at the two small faces that somehow carried my entire legacy. One had a faint dimple near his mouth, the same as mine when I rarely smiled. The other had her eyes, gentle, endless, capable of forgiveness. My throat burned. What are their names? I asked, the words falling softer now, stripped of anger. Adrian and Matteo, she said, a fragile smile flickering for an instant. I repeated their names in my mind like a prayer I never knew I needed. For the first time in years, I felt something pure, something terrifying. Love. Real, unfiltered, merciless love. I wanted to hold them, but my hands that had built empires through violence, felt too unworthy to touch something so innocent. She noticed the hesitation, the guilt in my stare, and reached out, laying her palm over mine. You can hold them, she whispered. The touch of her skin against mine was electric, too familiar, too painful. Slowly, I took one of the babies. Matteo, she said, and the world shifted. His warmth seeped through my veins like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He squirmed, made a soft sound that almost resembled a sigh, and in that moment, I knew I would burn everything I owned to protect him. I looked at Isabella, her eyes glistening with tears. He looks like you, she murmured. I tried to smile, but it felt foreign, like a mask that didn't fit anymore. He deserves better than me, I said quietly. She shook her head. He deserves a father who tries. The simplicity of her words gutted me. For years, I'd ruled with precision, made choices calculated by power and control, but this was something I couldn't control. I wanted to fix everything, to erase the hurt, to undo the past, but the truth was, some scars never fade. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of how fragile this moment was, how easily it could vanish. Outside, my men waited, their guns hidden under tailored suits, the world still turning in the orbit of fear I created. Yet here, in this sterile room, time bowed to love. I handed Matteo back and sat beside her, silence filling the space between us. You should go, she said softly after a while. The hospital isn't safe for someone like you. Her words carried no malice, just reality. I wanted to argue, to promise her safety, but even I knew my presence brought danger. Still, the thought of leaving felt like tearing my heart from my chest. I'll make it safe, I muttered. I'll make sure no one ever touches you or them. She sighed, shaking her head. You can't fix everything with threats, Luca. Maybe not, but it's all I ever knew. I stood slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into my shoulders. As I reached for the door, she called out, Luca? I turned, and our eyes met one last time. They deserve the best version of you, she said. Not the boss. The man I once loved. Her words lingered in the air long after I walked out, haunting me like the echo of a life I could have had. Outside, the night greeted me with its cold indifference. My men straightened, waiting for orders, but I said nothing. My heart was still in that room, with her, with them. The empire I built suddenly felt smaller, meaningless, fragile compared to the warmth of a newborn's heartbeat. I lit a cigarette, the flame trembling in the wind, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerful, I felt human. The words echoed in my mind like a gunshot that wouldn't stop ringing. Because you chose the Mafia over me. They cut deeper than any betrayal I'd ever known. For years, I told myself that power was a kind of love, that protecting my empire was the same as protecting her. But standing there, watching Isabella cradle the twins, I saw the truth written in her trembling hands and tired eyes. She didn't run because she stopped loving me. She ran because she couldn't survive the man I had become. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that everything I did, the deals, the bloodshed, the fear, was to build something strong enough that no one could ever hurt her. But how could I say that to a woman who saw me destroy everything good in the process? The silence between us was suffocating, filled with years of unspoken apologies and nights spent in separate hells. My hands curled into fists at my sides, not from anger at her, but from the helplessness clawing inside me. The twins shifted, their soft sounds pulling me back from the edge. I stared at them, two tiny pieces of life that somehow belonged to both of us, half her light, half my darkness. I had built empires, commanded armies, and walked through storms of bullets without flinching, but now, one look at them and I was terrified. Isabella, I said quietly, my voice breaking in a way I didn't recognize. Do you really think I wanted this? She looked at me then, her gaze sharp and wet with tears. You had a choice, Luca. You always did. I wanted to argue, to say that men like me never have choices, that the streets raised me before she ever did. But her eyes stopped me. They saw through every lie I ever told myself. The truth was brutal. I chose power because I thought love would always wait. I thought she would always wait. The weight of that arrogance sat heavy on my chest. You think I didn't miss you? I whispered, taking a step closer. Every night, I woke up reaching for you. I built this empire thinking it would make the pain stop. But nothing, ever filled the hole you left. Her lips trembled, and I saw the war behind her silence. Part of her wanted to believe me. The other part had already buried us years ago. I didn't want to hate you, she said softly. But I had to protect them from what you are. What I am. Not was. Her words twisted like a blade. I glanced down at my hands, hands that had taken lives, signed death warrants, built fear into a fortress. These were not hands meant to cradle innocence. Still, when I looked at the twins, I couldn't help but imagine them growing up knowing only half their story. They deserve to know me, I said, forcing the words out. They deserve the truth. Isabella shook her head. The truth will destroy them. No, I said sharply. The lies will. The air thickened, her breathing shallow, my pulse hammering. I didn't realize how close I had moved until I felt the warmth of her breath against my chest. The scent of her hair, the same jasmine she used to wear, dragged me back through time, to nights where the world outside didn't exist. I saw her laughter, the way she'd look at me before I became the man the city feared. And now, that woman stood before me like a memory I couldn't resurrect. I loved you, she said, voice cracking. God, Luca, I loved you so much it nearly killed me. My throat tightened. I reached out before I could stop myself, brushing a tear from her cheek. She didn't pull away, but her eyes stayed down. I still do, I admitted, the confession scraping through me. And I hate it. The words hung between us like smoke, truths too dangerous to breathe in. The twins shifted again, their soft cries slicing through the tension. She turned her attention to them, but I could see her hands trembling. You should go, she whispered. They need peace, and you bring everything but that. I didn't move. My body refused. You think walking away makes it right? I said, my voice rough. You think hiding them from me protects them? You're just teaching them that love runs. She winced, and for a second, I regretted the sharpness in my tone. But then she looked up, her green eyes blazing. And what have you taught the world, Luca? That love bleeds? Her words left me breathless. She was right. My love had always been war, loud, possessive, desperate. But this love? This was different. It was quiet, fragile, something I didn't know how to handle. I glanced at the twins again, realizing they'd never see the version of me she once loved, that they'd only know the stories whispered in the dark. The man with enemies and scars and too much blood on his hands. For the first time in my life, I wanted to be more than that. I wanted to be their father. I'll fix it, I said finally, almost to myself. I'll fix everything. She laughed, not cruelly, but with a sadness that burned. You can't fix death, Luca. You can't buy back lost years. Her voice softened. You can only choose who you are now. And just like that, I realized what terrified me most. It wasn't losing her again. It was facing myself without the armor of power, without the title that made me untouchable. Outside that hospital room, I was the king of New York. But here, I was just a man with empty hands and a heart that wouldn't stop bleeding. I took one last look at her, memorizing the curve of her face, the way the light fell across her hair, the two little lives breathing softly in her arms. Then I turned away before my resolve shattered. The hallway outside was quiet, but the moment I stepped into it, the weight of the world returned. My men stood ready, eyes sharp, waiting for orders. I said nothing. Because for once, I didn't know what to command. My entire life had been built on control, yet in that single room, I had none. As I walked down the corridor, every step felt like a sentence in a story I no longer wanted to live. But deep down, beneath the anger and regret, a new kind of fire stirred, a dangerous, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still rewrite my ending. When I left that room, I thought I could outrun the ache. But every echo of my footsteps down that corridor was a heartbeat I couldn't silence. The hospital lights flickered across the tiled floor, pale and cold, like the ghosts that trailed behind me. My men kept their distance, they could see it in my face, the storm brewing underneath. Outside, New York's skyline shimmered in the distance, but for once, I didn't feel like its ruler. I felt like a man exiled from his own kingdom. The night air bit through my suit as I stepped into the parking lot. A reminder that I was still alive, though I wished I wasn't. I lit a cigarette, hoping the smoke would choke down the memory of her voice. You can't buy back lost years. Those words replayed over and over until they stopped sounding like hers and started sounding like mine. I thought about the empire I'd built, how every brick was laid over the bones of men who defied me. I thought about how proud I used to be of that. Now it just felt like standing on a graveyard of my own making. My phone buzzed. It was Marco, my second-in-command, loyal since the days we used to steal cars to survive. Boss, he said, his tone cautious, the Colombians want an answer by dawn. I almost laughed. Dawn. The world still expected me to make decisions, to play the part of the unshakable king. Tell them to wait, I muttered. Something's changed. Marco hesitated. You good, Luca? I looked back at the hospital doors. No. But I will be. I ended the call and slipped into the car, the leather cold against my skin. The driver asked where to. I didn't know. For once, I had no destination, only memories pulling me backward. I told him to drive. The city blurred past in streaks of neon and rain, every street corner whispering her name. I remembered the first time I met Isabella, how she'd been volunteering at a shelter in the Bronx, how she'd laughed when I told her my hands were too dirty for her world. She said, "Then wash them." I never did. I let the city stain me until nothing pure remained. Now she had proof of what purity could create, 2 innocent lives, and I wasn't part of it. The thought clawed at me until I couldn't breathe. I told the driver to pull over near the river, the place I used to go when the weight of the crown felt too heavy. The Hudson was dark, the water restless under the moonlight. I stepped out, letting the wind whip against me, cold and merciless. I stared into the water and saw reflections of two worlds, the man I was and the man I could have been. For the first time in years, I didn't see power. I saw fear. I saw a father who didn't know how to be one. I took out my gun, staring at the weapon that had solved every problem in my life. But this time, there was no enemy to aim at, only the mirror of my own mistakes. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Dr. Elena Moretti. "She's stable. The babies are fine." Relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. I sank onto the hood of the car, exhaling smoke and grief. Stable. It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. Maybe the universe wasn't done punishing me yet. Maybe it was giving me one last chance. I didn't deserve forgiveness, but maybe I could earn it, one choice at a time. I looked back at the hospital rising in the distance and made a silent vow. I would build something for them, something clean. Not through blood, not through fear, but through redemption. I didn't know how, but I knew it had to start tonight. I climbed back into the car and told the driver to take me home. The Romano estate loomed like a fortress when we arrived, tall gates, armed guards, everything she hated about my world. Inside, the grand hallway was quiet, shadows stretching across marble floors. I walked past the portraits of men who'd ruled before me, their eyes painted with the same hunger I once carried. They were all dead, consumed by the same fire that burned in me. I poured a glass of whiskey, the amber catching the dim light, but when I brought it to my lips, I stopped. The smell of it turned my stomach. For the first time, I didn't want to numb myself. I wanted to feel the pain, the regret, the possibility that somewhere in that hospital, two little hearts were beating because of me. I set the glass down untouched. My mind drifted back to Isabella's words, "You can only choose who you are now." So who was I now? A criminal trying to pretend he could be a father? A man who wanted to trade his throne for forgiveness? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing: walking away wasn't an option anymore. They were mine. My blood. My legacy. If I couldn't be part of their world, I'd make their world safer from mine. I called Marco again. "Get rid of the shipments scheduled for next week," I ordered. He sounded confused. "Boss, that's a few million, burn them." Silence. Then, understood. I hung up before he could ask why. I leaned against the desk, feeling the room tilt around me. The decision felt small compared to everything I'd done, but it was a start. Maybe redemption began in ashes. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. I looked out the window, watching lightning crawl across the sky like veins of fire. Somewhere out there, Isabella was probably holding our sons, whispering to them that monsters weren't real. I wanted that to be true. I wanted to become the proof of it. My phone rang again, an unknown number this time. When I answered, a familiar voice slithered through the line. "Romano," it said. "Heard you've gone soft. That hospital means something to you, doesn't it?" My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The caller laughed, low and venomous. "You took something from us in Miami. Now we'll take something from you." The line went dead. My hand tightened around the phone until the screen cracked. Fear, real, raw fear, ripped through me. Not for myself, but for them. I barked orders into the intercom, summoning my men. But inside I already knew, the past I tried to bury was coming for me. And it knew exactly where to strike. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of their breathing, the twins. Tiny and unaware of the storm that had shaped their father before they were born. I sat beside the bed, elbows on my knees, staring at them as if they were two fragile pieces of light the world had no right to touch. For years, I'd sat across tables stacked with money, with guns, with blood on my conscience, but none of it ever made my hands tremble the way they did now. I'll protect them, I whispered, my voice raw, like the promise was being carved into me from the inside out. Even if it means giving up everything. And I meant it. For the first time in my life, the word everything didn't mean the empire, the cars, or the fear in men's eyes, it meant them. Isabella was sitting beside me, her hair slightly tangled, her eyes heavy with both exhaustion and suspicion. I could feel the wall she'd built between us, invisible but solid, a fortress built out of years of disappointment. Yet beneath it, I caught something flickering, hope, faint but alive. She didn't speak at first, and neither did I. The silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred, filled with the ghosts of who we once were. When one of the twins stirred, letting out a soft whimper, I instinctively reached for him. My hand hovered for a moment, terrified I'd break something so perfect just by touching it. But Isabella nodded, barely, but enough. I slid my hand beneath the baby, feeling his tiny weight settle against me. My heart clenched in a way I didn't recognize. His warmth seeped into my chest, his small breath brushing against my wrist. I'd held gold, diamonds, weapons worth millions, but this was priceless. You're safe, I murmured, more to myself than to him. I swear it. The words felt foreign. Protecting meant killing, controlling, dominating. But this, protecting them, meant letting go of everything I once believed made me strong. I glanced up at Isabella. She was watching me, eyes softening just enough for me to see the reflection of the man she used to love. For a split second, time folded back. I saw us under the rain, years ago, her laughter echoing through empty streets as we danced like idiots who believed love was enough to rewrite destiny. I remembered how her hair had stuck to her face, how I'd brushed it back and kissed her forehead, promising her a world I never gave her. That memory hit harder than any bullet. You look different, she said quietly, pulling me back to the present. I met her gaze, searching for anger but finding only fatigue. You sound surprised, I said. She shrugged. I guess I didn't think you could still be this person. I wanted to tell her I didn't know if I could either. That the man she was looking at was a broken thing held together by guilt and the sound of two babies breathing. But I just smiled faintly instead. Maybe he never really died, I said. Maybe he was just buried under the wrong kind of love. Her eyes softened again, but she didn't reply. I looked back at the twins, one of them had her eyes, and the other had my stubborn frown even in sleep. For the first time, I realized they were my redemption in flesh and blood. Proof that I could still create something good in a world built on everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration cutting through the calm. I didn't even look at it. Whatever it was, business, deals, blood, it could wait. For once, I wanted to exist only in this small, perfect moment. They deserve better than this world, Isabella said softly. Better than what we were. I nodded. Then I'll give it to them. She shook her head. You can't just promise that, Luca. You can't unmake what you are. I placed the baby back into her arms, careful not to wake him. Maybe not, I said. But I can choose what I become next. The truth was, I didn't know how to be anything else. The Mafia wasn't just my job, it was in my blood, in the way I breathed. Every decision I'd made since I was 15 was about survival. But when I looked at my sons, survival didn't seem enough anymore. I wanted more for them. I wanted them to live without flinching at shadows, without wondering if their last name would get them killed. I wanted them to have what I never did, a father who wasn't haunted. Isabella sighed, rubbing her thumb gently over one of the twins' tiny hands. You always said the world doesn't change, she whispered. You said only the people in it do. I smiled faintly. Then watch me change. She laughed, a sound that carried both disbelief and nostalgia. You never did know how to give up, did you? Not when it comes to you, I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out like a confession, too raw to take back. She froze, her eyes flicking to mine, and for a moment the air between us cracked open, past and present colliding. Luca, she began, but I shook my head. You don't have to say anything, I whispered. Just know that I remember everything. The way you smiled when you thought I wasn't looking. The way you held me like I was more than the chaos I came from. You were the only thing that ever made me believe I could be good. She blinked back tears, looking away. And yet, you still chose the darkness. Because it was all I knew, I said. But now I know something else, what it feels like to lose the only light that ever mattered. The silence that followed was thick, fragile, and terrifyingly honest. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't even deserve it. But when Isabella reached out and placed her hand over mine, something inside me shifted. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said softly. "Then I'll make one I can," I replied. "I'll be here. For them. For you. No matter what it costs." And in that moment, I wasn't the boss of anything. I wasn't the man the city feared or the name whispered in alleys. I was just Luca, the man who once loved a woman enough to dream of rain instead of blood. That night, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, too quiet for a man like me, used to the hum of engines outside, the echo of footsteps in the hall, the tension that never really slept. But here, in this small guest room where Isabella and the twins rested, the world felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't surrounded by guards or guns, just the sound of breathing that reminded me I was still human. I stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the floor like silver paint, thinking about everything I'd done to end up here. I'd built an empire from nothing, every dollar soaked in loyalty and betrayal, but standing here, I realized how empty it all was. Power had filled the spaces where love used to live, and now that love was standing a few feet away, holding the children I never knew I had. I turned slightly, watching Isabella sleep, one twin curled against her chest and the other beside her arm. She looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before I destroyed everything between us. Her hair was still damp from the rain earlier, strands sticking to her skin. And I remembered the first time I saw her, back when I was still more boy than boss. When she smiled at me like the world wasn't already written in blood. I'd thought I could keep her safe by keeping her out, but all I did was push her away into a life where I didn't exist. The guilt burned, slow and merciless. My phone buzzed again on the table. I picked it up without unlocking it. The screen showed one name, Marco. My right-hand man. My oldest ally. My brother in everything but blood. I didn't answer. I knew what he wanted, to remind me about the shipment, the meeting, the men waiting for orders. But tonight, they could wait. I put the phone down, turned it off, and for the first time in years, the world outside stopped demanding something from me. I walked back to the bed and sat down quietly, careful not to wake them. My fingers brushed against the small hand of my son, Noah. Isabella had whispered their names earlier, Noah and Luca Jr. I'd laughed when I heard the second one. "You named him after me?" I'd asked. She'd shrugged, eyes defiant. "I named him after the man I loved. Not the one you became." That line had cut deeper than any bullet. I deserved it. But as I watched the boy sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just watching my past anymore, I was staring at my second chance. The Mafia world had taught me many things, how to lie, how to fight, how to survive, but it never taught me how to be a father. And yet, in that room, surrounded by nothing but soft breaths and forgiveness I didn't deserve, I wanted to learn. The doorknob turned slightly, snapping me back to instinct. My hand went to the gun tucked under my belt before I even thought about it. But it was just Rosa, the old housekeeper, her gray hair tied neatly, holding a tray of warm milk. She froze when she saw the gun. "Still the same," she muttered, shaking her head as she placed the tray down. "A man who sees war even in peace." I exhaled, setting the gun aside. "Old habits die hard." She glanced at Isabella and the twins. "You think you can fix this?" I looked at her, unsure how to answer. Rosa had seen everything, the rise, the blood, the loneliness. She'd been like a mother to me when I had none. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I have to try." She nodded slowly. "Then start by staying alive. The streets are whispering, Luca. Some of your men are getting restless. They don't understand why you disappeared." I clenched my jaw. The world I'd built was already cracking, and part of me knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to swallow me again. Let them whisper, I said quietly. They'll understand soon enough. Rosa studied me for a moment longer, then sighed. You sound like your father. The words hit me like a slap. My father, the man who'd ruled with fear and fists, who'd taught me that love was weakness and trust was suicide. I'd spent my life trying not to become him, but maybe I already had. I'm nothing like him, I said, sharper than I meant to. Rosa gave me a sad smile. Then prove it. When she left, the room fell silent again, but her words lingered like smoke. Prove it. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had ended lives, signed deals, carried sins, and I wondered if they could ever build something instead of breaking it. Isabella stirred softly, half awake, her voice barely above a whisper. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing, I said. Go back to sleep. She opened her eyes, studying me. You're lying. I couldn't help but smile. You still see through me. She smiled faintly, too. Always did. There it was again, that invisible thread between us, fragile but unbroken. Do you ever think we could start over? I asked before I could stop myself. She hesitated. Starting over means forgetting what happened. No, I said. It means remembering and still choosing to move forward. She looked away. I don't know if I can trust you, Luca. I leaned forward, my voice quiet, steady. Then trust this, every man I've ever hurt, every sin I've ever carried, none of it scares me anymore. The only thing that scares me is losing you again. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sigh that sounded like surrender, she whispered, Don't make me regret giving you another chance. I nodded. I won't. She closed her eyes again, and I sat there until dawn crept through the curtains, painting her face in soft gold. That morning light felt like a promise, fragile but real. And as I looked at my sons, my blood, my redemption, I made another vow. To be the man they could look up to, not the name the world feared. The streets would call it weakness. My enemies would call it betrayal. But I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't living for the Mafia. I was living for them. And in that choice, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. They told me not to stay. They said hospitals were for healing, not hiding. But when I looked at those two tiny chests rising and falling under the thin blankets, I understood there was nothing to choose between staying and leaving, only what kind of monster I wanted to be. Days blurred into one another in that white-smelled room, monitors beeped, nurses shuffled in and out, and I learned the rhythm of feeding, the little movements that meant hunger or comfort. Each night I slept in a chair so stiff my back screamed. Each morning I woke with the weight of a quietness I'd never wanted before. News travels fast in our world. Even here, with sterile lights and the hush of corridors, the city found me. Rumors leak like blood, the boss is distracted, Romano is soft, the throne wobbles. My phone buzzed with calls I didn't answer. Marco paced like a caged animal on the other end of the line, his voice low and urgent when he finally got through. Boss, whispers are turning into demands. Men want action. Rivals are sniffing weakness. I could hear the calculation in his tone, the old rhythm of territory and numbers he'd learned to breathe. Tell them to stand down, I said, but the words tasted hollow even to my own ears. They won't, he said. They say children will make you sentimental. They say you'll forget who you are. I closed my eyes and saw Isabella's hands, the way she'd lift the twins' faces to kiss foreheads. I thought about the small fist that had once wrapped around my finger and how something in me had unclenched without consent. The empire had always been my heart and my drug. To walk away felt like admitting defeat, but what was the point of power if it meant my sons could inherit my enemies as lullabies? My advisor came in, as he always did when the world demanded rules be enforced and blood be measured. He was precise, the kind of man who'd carved his survival out of calculation and coldness. He cornered me in the private room off the corridor, his voice the same flat blade that had carved out so many plans. Luca, you can't protect them if you walk away, he said, as if the sentence were a fact and not a wish. He listed the costs: territory lost, alliances shaken, the heat from rivals who smelled hesitation. When he spoke of walking away, I felt the old instinct stir: defensiveness, sharpening knives, moving pieces on a board. He thought of the empire as wood and stone. I suddenly saw it as a pyre. Then burn it, I said before I could think. The words surprised me. They surprised him. He recoiled like I'd struck him. Burn the empire? He repeated, incredulous. He catalogued losses in the cadence of a man who'd never loved anything without strings attached. You cannot watch me, I said. Because in that instant, surrounded by the soft breathing of small lives that had nothing to do with our sins, the math shifted. The cost of holding on was no longer measured in empty bank accounts or bruised pride. It was measured in the quiet futures of two boys who might wake one morning to a city that named their father with a curse. I had been a ruler of fear for so long I forgot fear had a face: the fear in Isabella's eyes when she looked at me, the fear of the men who would target my blood to hurt me. If burning the empire meant they would be safe, if ash would be the only trace of what I'd built, then let the world remember me as a ruin rather than let my sons remember me as the thing that haunted them. My advisor argued. Oh, how he argued! He spoke of leverage, of enemies who would fill any void I left, of the vacuum that always breeds worse things. He tried to tether me back to the language I'd learned: threats, bargaining chips, shows of force. But my voice had changed. The bass that once rumbled commands now trembled when he spoke of sacrifice. You're speaking like a man who's already gone soft, he said finally, and I almost smiled at the old insult. Maybe I was soft, but softness had a new logic now, the calculus of a man who'd seen what a life without him could be for the people he loved. I thought of the boys, names still warm on my tongue, the way Matteo had opened his eyes and looked like the future. The way Adrian's small mouth had formed around milk with a trust that seemed to accuse me of every choice I ever made. My empire could be rebuilt by others. Sons could not. I remember the first order I gave after that: halt the shipments, lock the warehouses, call the crews and tell them to stand down. Marco wanted to argue, to explain why bleeding the operation would be catastrophic. I told him the only catastrophic thing would be my sons learning the language of my business as lullabies. So we obscured deals, redirected flows, sold off portions quietly, like amputating a limb to save the body. Enemies tested the edges. There were 2 nights when men I'd never seen before watched the compound from the trees, their silhouettes like waiting judgments. I ordered extra patrols, and the men I trusted moved like ghosts in patterns familiar to me, but different now, less about dominance, more about shielding. I spent cash I would have hoarded on safe houses, nannies, doctors. I paid off men to forget names. I bribed, more carefully now, those with tongues I couldn't bear to trust. Each transaction felt like a betrayal of the person I'd been and a purchase of the person I might become. The streets didn't forgive easily. Whispers hardened into bullets of reputation. Men who'd once knelt now watched like predators, waiting for the moment to carve advantage from my tenderness. The Colombians tested Marco at dusk, but he met them with a calm that had learned my new rhythm and they backed down, suspicious. Still, the calls continued, threats cloaked in etiquette, attempts to bait me into a trap. One morning a car burned on the east side with a note nailed to its hood. The message was simple: family is a weakness. I read it with the twins asleep against my chest in a dim room at the safe house, and something cold and fierce rose in me. No one would call my family a weakness and live. Not now. My advisor came to me nights later with a list of names, men who would prosper in the vacuum if I stepped away. If you pull back, he said, voice low, they'll take everything. You'll die in exile. I let him talk. I let him list the outcomes like chess moves. Then I looked at my sons sleeping, their cheeks plump and innocent, and I thought of exile as a small thing compared to presence. Better to be a hunted man who kissed his boys goodnight than an untouchable ruler who never saw their faces. If they come for me, I told him, every muscle in my body tense with a dangerous calm, they won't touch them. He watched me, trying to decipher whether I meant bluff or bone. How? He asked. I didn't have a full plan. I had resolve and a willingness to be reckless in ways I never had been. I would make sacrifices, money, land, power. I would surrender pieces of the map until my enemies grew bored or broke. If men wanted the throne, let them kneel over ashes left by a man who loved his sons more than his crown. In the end, the empire reacted like any living thing, some parts withered, others crawled to fill the void. I watched allies change colors in days, and I watched a few loyal souls stand taller. Loyalty in our world is transactional, but there are debts that run deeper than contracts, debts of history, of streets where we bled together, of nights where hands that once shared cigarettes now share rifles. I couldn't buy back 5 years, but I could buy silence for a while, and I did. Yet every softening had a price. Men with knives whispered promises of vendettas. Those I cut loose took their bitterness to corners I didn't know. Nights were the worst, when the hospital quieted and the city hummed its familiar threats, because that's when regret crawled into my throat like smoke. But when dawn came and I watched the twins stir and reach for bottles, the entire calculus simplified. Power is a currency, but love is an economy that compounds in the heart. I had the choice to spend one for the other, and that night, cradling my son, I spent the empire like loose change to buy them the life I never had. The hospital felt smaller with every passing day. As if the walls were slowly closing in, reminding me that peace wasn't meant for men like me. I'd spent a lifetime turning every space into a battlefield, but this room, this quiet sanctuary filled with soft cries and whispered lullabies, had become the one place I didn't want to taint with my past. Isabella noticed the way I flinched whenever a door opened too fast, the way my hand still twitched toward my jacket when footsteps echoed down the corridor. I couldn't turn it off. Years of paranoia don't fade just because you suddenly remember how to love. Still, I tried. I held bottles instead of guns. I learned how to rock a cradle instead of a trigger. I even started to smile again, not the kind that masks pain, but the kind that breaks through it. Isabella saw it too, though she said nothing, only watched me with a mix of disbelief and fear, like she was waiting for the old Luca to rise again and prove her right. And maybe she wasn't wrong to doubt. The world outside didn't stop turning just because I wanted to be a father. Marco called again, his voice sharp with urgency. They hit our shipment on Pier 47. 2 men dead. Another missing. I didn't answer at first. I just stared at the twins in their cribs, wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. Boss, he pressed, you need to give the order. If you stay silent, they'll think you're weak. Weak. That word followed me everywhere. It echoed in my father's voice, in every scar carved into my skin. Weak men die early, that's what I was taught. But looking at those sleeping faces, I realized strength wasn't in killing. It was in staying when everything inside you screamed to run. No retaliation, I said finally. Marco cursed. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I replied, but it's mine to make. I hung up and felt the air shift around me, like the city itself had heard my decision and started sharpening its knives. The next morning, a car idled outside the hospital. Black sedan. Tinted windows. I didn't need to look twice to know it wasn't friendly. My instinct screamed, and I told Isabella to stay inside while I went down to the parking lot. The air was cold, thick with the smell of rain and gasoline. I approached slowly, hand in my coat pocket, heart steady. The window rolled down just enough for me to see a face I hadn't expected, Nico, a lieutenant from one of the rival crews. You've gone soft, Romano, he said, smirking. Word is, you've traded bullets for baby bottles. My jaw tightened. Say what you came to say. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the kind of arrogance that comes from believing a king has fallen. Your men are scared. Your streets are restless. Step down, and maybe we let you live long enough to play house. I didn't move, didn't blink. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. This was the nature of power, show a little mercy, and the vultures circle. I leaned in just enough for him to see the truth in my eyes. "You're mistaking peace for surrender," I said quietly. "I'm still Luca Romano. The moment you forget that will be your last." His smirk faltered. He rolled the window up and the car pulled away, but I knew this wasn't over. Nothing in my world ever ended that clean. When I returned upstairs, Isabella was standing by the window, holding one of the twins. "Who was it?" she asked. "No one worth remembering," I said, but she saw through the lie. She always did. "You can't do this alone, Luca," she said softly. "You can't fight everyone." I walked over, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I don't have to fight everyone. Just the ones who think they can touch what's mine." She shook her head. "That's the problem. You keep thinking everything can be protected with violence." I looked down at the baby in her arms, at the innocence that didn't know the world I'd built. "What if violence is all I know?" I asked. Her eyes softened. "Then learn something else." Those words stayed with me long after she turned away. That night, I stood on the rooftop of the hospital, the city stretching below me like a living beast. Lights flickered in the distance, sirens cried, and somewhere out there, men were plotting the fall of the Romano name. I'd built this skyline with blood and ambition, and now it was turning its teeth on me. I could walk away completely, disappear with Isabella and the kids, start over somewhere the name Romano meant nothing. But part of me knew it wasn't that simple. You don't walk away from the Mafia, you either die in it or you dismantle it from within. So, I made a decision under that cold midnight sky, one that would change everything. I would dismantle it piece by piece. Sell every front, close every port, cut every alliance that relied on violence. If I had to bury my empire to keep my family breathing, then I would be the one to shovel the dirt. The next morning, I called Marco. "Tell the men to clear the docks," I said. "All shipments stop. No exceptions." There was silence on the line. "Boss, they'll come for us." "For you." "Let them." My voice was calm, final. "If they want my crown, they can take it from the ashes." When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. The world might call it weakness, but I knew it was strength. The kind that comes from finally knowing what you're willing to lose for love. When I went back into the room, Isabella looked up from the crib, eyes questioning. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, kneeling beside her. "Everything's changing," I said, my hand brushing against hers. "But this time, it's the right kind of change." She smiled faintly, uncertain but hopeful, and for the first time in my life, hope didn't feel like a lie. I looked at the twins, my sons, my blood, and I understood the truth I'd been running from all along. I didn't need an empire. I just needed them to be safe, to grow up in a world where the name Luca Romano didn't cast a shadow over their lives. And as the morning light poured into the room, warm and golden, I realized something simple, something I'd forgotten a long time ago. Love isn't what makes a man weak. It's what makes him strong enough to let everything else burn. Stepping down wasn't a ceremony, it was a slow bleeding away of everything that had once defined me. The papers were signed in a dim office, sunlight slanting through the blinds like prison bars, the smell of old whiskey and leather filling the air as Marco watched silently from across the desk. I placed the last folder in front of him, the one that would end the Romano legacy as the city knew it, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper felt louder than any gunshot I'd ever fired. When it was done, I leaned back, exhaling a lifetime of tension, and realized how quiet the world could be when it wasn't screaming your name. "That's it," I said, voice rough. "It's yours now." Marco looked at me with a sadness I hadn't expected. Loyalty and disappointment warred in his eyes. "You sure you can live without it?" he asked. I gave him a small smile. "No. But I can try." He nodded once, the kind of nod that meant goodbye in our language, then walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I sat there alone, staring at the stacks of cash and contracts that once represented my throne, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerful, I felt free. The silence pressed around me like water, heavy and cleansing. I thought about calling Isabella, about telling her it was over, but some things don't need words. Some things you just prove. 2 weeks later I stood outside the hospital, the same one where fear had first cracked open the stone cage of my chest. The air was bright, the city humming in the distance, and I held the check in my hand, a donation large enough to buy forgiveness, though I knew forgiveness couldn't be purchased. The hospital director shook my hand, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions about redemption, about transformation, about whether a man like Luca Romano could ever really change. I didn't answer. The only thing that mattered was inside. When the door slid open, I walked through with Isabella at my side, the twins laughing in her arms. The new wing glowed with polished marble and sunlight, the letters carved deep into the wall, the Isabella Foundation for Mothers and Children. Seeing her name there hit me harder than any headline. It wasn't just a tribute. It was an apology written in stone. Isabella looked up at it, eyes shining with tears she tried to hide, and for a moment we just stood there, silent in a way that felt holy. "You did this?" she whispered. I nodded. "We did," I said. "It's yours as much as mine." She shook her head gently. "No, Luca. It's for them. For every woman who never had a choice, for every child who lost a father to the streets." I swallowed hard, realizing she was right. This wasn't about us anymore. It was about what came next. Later that afternoon, we sat on a bench outside the foundation, watching the twins chase sunlight across the grass. They were learning to walk, wobbly steps, tiny laughs, and each fall made them giggle instead of cry. I envied that resilience. I'd spent my life falling and never once found the courage to laugh about it. Isabella reached for my hand, and I let her take it, the touch grounding me in a way no oath ever had. "You really let it go," she said quietly. "The empire, the money, all of it." I nodded. "Yeah. Turns out I was the one being owned all along." She smiled faintly, brushing her thumb across my knuckles. "And now?" I looked at the twins, their faces lit by the kind of innocence the world had almost beaten out of me. "Now I just want to learn how to be a man they can look up to," I said. "Not a name people whisper about in fear." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Maybe this time we build something that doesn't require blood to stand." I breathed in the scent of her hair. That mix of jasmine and rain that always dragged me back to younger, simpler days, and for the first time in years I believed her. Maybe we could build something real. Maybe redemption wasn't a myth for men like me, it was just a choice you had to make every single day. The ceremony ended quietly. People filtered out, leaving us in that golden hour where the sun stretched long shadows across the courtyard. The twins were tired, half asleep in their stroller, and Isabella turned to me with a softness I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. I didn't have to ask what she meant. The power. The fear. The crown. Sometimes, I admitted. Not the violence. Not the control. But the certainty. When you run an empire, you always know what tomorrow brings, even if it's war. When you're just a man trying to start over, tomorrow's a mystery. She smiled. "Maybe that's the point." I laughed quietly, a sound that felt strange in my own mouth. "You always did like mysteries. And you always liked winning," she teased. "Maybe this time we both can." I turned to her, the sunlight catching the edge of her hair, and saw the woman who had once walked away from me not because she stopped loving me, but because she loved herself enough to survive me. That realization stung and healed all at once. "Thank you," I said. She frowned slightly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance to get it right." She didn't answer with words. She just squeezed my hand, and that was enough. As evening fell, we walked back to the car. The city skyline glowed in the distance. The same towers that once felt like trophies now looked like gravestones for a version of myself I'd finally buried. I thought about everything I'd lost, the friends, the soldiers, the empire, and realized none of it mattered compared to the small hand that suddenly grabbed my finger from the stroller. I looked down at my son, his wide eyes staring up at me, full of trust one hadn't earned but would spend the rest of my life protecting. In that moment, I understood what peace really was. It wasn't the absence of enemies. It was the presence of something worth losing. As we drove away, I rolled down the window, letting the city air rush in. Somewhere behind us, the world I built was still burning quietly, a slow fire eating away the last of my sins. But ahead, there was only open road and the faint laughter of the woman and children who'd somehow saved me from myself. I whispered under my breath, almost afraid to break the spell, I built an empire of fear. But they built an empire of love. Isabella heard me and smiled. Reaching across the seat to take my hand, maybe this time, Luca, she said softly. We build it together. And as the car moved toward the setting sun, the man I used to be disappeared in the rearview mirror, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a promise, to be better, to stay, to love without fear. Morning light filtered through the nursery window, painting soft gold across the walls, and for a moment I just stood there, watching the twins sleep, two tiny miracles breathing in rhythm, like the heartbeat of a life I'd never thought I'd have. The world outside was quiet, for once not filled with sirens or whispers of betrayal. My phone, once a weapon that never stopped ringing, sat dead on the nightstand. No more orders. No more men waiting for my word to decide who lived or died. Just silence, and the faint hum of peace. Isabella was in the kitchen, humming softly, the sound so gentle it could break a man who'd spent his life surrounded by gunfire. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her move, her hair catching the sunlight, her face softer than I remembered. There was something sacred about that ordinary sight. The woman who had once walked away from me because she refused to be collateral damage in my world was now here, pouring coffee in my kitchen, and somehow, it didn't feel like a miracle, it felt like the result of 1,000 choices. Finally made right, when she turned and caught me staring. She smiled in that quiet way she always did when she knew I was lost in thought. You're awake early, she said. Couldn't sleep, I admitted. The silence still feels loud. She laughed softly. You'll get used to it. I walked over, wrapping my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. I don't ever want to get used to this, I whispered. Not if it means forgetting how much I used to crave it. She leaned back into me, her fingers tracing the scars on my hands, each one a reminder of a life we both barely survived. You've changed, she said quietly. You really let it all go. I hesitated. I had to. Power never made me feel safe. But you, I turned her gently to face me, her eyes bright and unguarded. You do. Her lips trembled into a smile. And I kissed her, slow and steady, not like the desperate man I used to be, but like someone who finally understood the value of time. Later that day, I took the twins to the park. It was the same park Isabella and I used to walk through when life was simple and love didn't come with bloodstains. The grass was greener than I remembered, the air cleaner somehow, maybe because I could finally breathe without paranoia chasing me. I watched as my son stumbled toward a butterfly, his tiny hands reaching for it with wonder, while my daughter laughed from her stroller, clapping as if he'd caught a star. I crouched beside him, helping him back to his feet, and it hit me, this was what power should have always meant. Not control. Not fear. But the ability to protect something pure. One day, I murmured, brushing his hair aside. You'll understand what your old man had to lose to find you. He looked up at me. Too young to understand, but his smile was answer enough. When we got home, Isabella was sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee and a box in her lap. What's that? I asked, setting the twins in their playpen. She opened it slowly, revealing a bundle of photographs, our wedding day, our first apartment, the old beach house where we spent our last summer before everything fell apart. I hadn't seen those pictures in years. My chest tightened as I picked one up, me and her, drenched in rain, laughing like fools outside that broken-down diner in Brooklyn. I kept them, she said softly. Even when I wanted to forget. I sat beside her, thumbing through the photos, each one a ghost of a life that could have been. Why show me now? I asked. She looked out toward the horizon. Because maybe it's time to stop remembering what we lost and start seeing what we've rebuilt. Her words sank deep, the kind of truth that settles into your bones. I reached for her hand, our fingers lacing together like they never forgot how. You're right, I said. We can't live in the ashes forever. She smiled faintly. Then let's build something new. That night, after the twins were asleep, I went to my office. Not the dark, weapon-filled room I used to command my empire from. This one had a crib in the corner and walls painted pale blue. On the desk sat a single folder, the final documents transferring the last of my holdings to charity. The hospitals, the orphanages, the shelters, all funded by what used to be blood money. I stared at my old signature one last time, bold and cruel, then crossed it out with a black pen. That was the moment I knew the past was truly over. I wasn't Luca Romano, the Mafia boss anymore. I was Luca, the man who'd finally chosen to live. I stepped outside to the balcony, the city lights shimmering below like a sea of ghosts. For years I'd ruled that city with fear. Now, it ruled itself. And maybe that was okay. Isabella joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You're quiet, she said. Just thinking. About what? I turned to her, watching the wind play with her hair. About how strange it feels to finally be happy. She smiled, that soft, knowing smile that made everything else fade away. Happiness doesn't have to be strange, Luca. It just has to be real. I reached for her hand again, pulling her close. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it is. She leaned into me, her head resting against my chest. Below us, the city pulsed with life, honest life, the kind that didn't need fear to survive. Days turned into weeks, and peace became our new rhythm. I opened a small cafe downtown, nothing fancy, just a place with good coffee and warm light. Sometimes Isabella helped with the books, and sometimes she just sat by the window with the twins, watching the world go by. People didn't whisper my name anymore, and I didn't miss it. The men who once feared me had disappeared into their own wars, their own endings. For me, every sunrise felt like absolution. One morning, as I opened the shop, a little boy walked in with his mother. He pointed to the photo on the wall, the Isabella Foundation for Mothers and Children. Is that you? He asked. I smiled. No, I said. That's someone much braver. When the day ended, I walked home through streets that used to belong to me. Now, they belong to the world. Isabella was waiting at the door, the twins running toward me on tiny, unsteady legs. They crashed into me, laughing, their little hands clutching my shirt. I lifted them both, one on each arm, their giggles echoing through the evening air. Isabella stood behind them, smiling with that same light I used to chase but could never hold. I looked at them, all three, and it hit me that everything I ever wanted was right here. Not power. Not control. Just this moment. Just them. I kissed Isabella softly, whispering against her lips, "You were right. We did build it together." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "An empire of love," she said, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I finally understood that redemption doesn't erase the past, it builds something beautiful in its place. The man I used to be had died the day I opened that hospital door. And in his place stood someone new, a father, a husband, a man reborn not by fire, but by love that refused to die.